In the stillness of a quiet room, the kind of night where the world outside feels hushed and unhurried, we travel in thought to the early years of the 21st century. The air of that time feels different in memory, textured with the hum of flip phones and dial-up modems, the soft clatter of CDs sliding into their jewel cases, and the first glimmers of a digital music revolution. It was a world both connected and distant. Social media was in its infancy. The music charts were ruled by voices from both pop and rock, and the country music scene was steeped in tradition. It was into this backdrop that a young girl from Pennsylvania began her journey, a journey that would, over 2 decades, shift not only the sound of pop music, but the way the music industry itself would operate. From the vantage point of the future, we can see her story not as a series of fleeting celebrity moments, but as a thread woven deeply into the tapestry of cultural history. Her name, Taylor Swift, would come to represent more than melodies and lyrics. It would embody the resilience of an artist who adapted, reinvented, and redefined her place in a rapidly changing world. And so, we begin, not in the roaring stadiums of her later years, but in a quieter place, among pine trees, childhood dreams, and the sound of a guitar string trembling in the hands of a determined girl. Taylor Allison Swift was born on December 13, 1989, in Reading, Pennsylvania. The closing years of the 1980s carried with them a blend of optimism and uncertainty. But in her family's world, there was stability, tradition, and the warmth of close ties. Her parents, Scott and Andrea Swift, nurtured their children with an encouraging spirit, one that allowed young Taylor to explore her interests freely. Her earliest years were spent on a Christmas tree farm in Wyoming. It was a place of seasonal magic, rows upon rows of evergreens, the scent of pine resin in the air, and the rhythmic work of planting, pruning, and preparing for the holidays. That farm became not only a backdrop to her childhood, but a symbol in her later storytelling, a reminder of roots, seasons, and the quiet beauty of rural life. Even before music became her destiny, Taylor had a fascination with words. She would write short poems, often inspired by the books she devoured or the everyday experiences of childhood. Her grandmother, a professional opera singer, may have planted the earliest seeds of musicality in her. But it wasn't until she discovered the guitar that her path began to take shape. A chance meeting with a computer repairman, who happened to know a few chords, introduced her to the instrument. From that moment, she practiced relentlessly, fingers growing sore from pressing against the steel strings, determination driving her to play through the discomfort. Soon, she was not only strumming, but crafting her own songs, tiny capsules of feeling that hinted at the songwriter she would become. By the age of 11, she was performing at local events and even singing the national anthem at a Philadelphia 76ers basketball game. These early performances revealed not just talent, but a composure beyond her years, a quiet confidence that would serve her well in the years to come. Opportunity often asks for courage, and in Taylor's case, it meant leaving behind the familiar for the uncertain promise of a music city hundreds of miles away. Nashville, Tennessee, the beating heart of country music, was a place where countless dreamers arrived each year, guitars in hand, hoping to be heard. The Swift family relocated to Hendersonville, just outside of Nashville, to give Taylor the proximity she needed. She was still a teenager, navigating both school and the music business. With demo tapes in hand, she knocked on the doors of record labels along Music Row. Most said no, Some didn't respond at all, but one yes was all it would take. That yes came in the form of a development deal with Big Machine Records. In 2006, at the age of 16, she released her self-titled debut album. The songs, Tim McGraw, Teardrops on My Guitar, Our Song, told stories of young love, high school crushes, and heartache. They resonated deeply with a generation of listeners, not because they were complex, but because they were honest. Her arrival in country music was both traditional and fresh. She respected the storytelling roots of the genre while bringing in a youthful perspective. By the end of that debut era, she had earned multiple awards and a growing fan base that felt personally connected to her lyrics. The release of Fearless in 2008 marked a turning point. The album was both commercially successful and critically acclaimed, carrying with it songs like Love Story and You Belong With Me, tracks that blurred the lines between country and pop. Her narratives became more cinematic, her melodies more expansive. The Fearless Tour brought her to arenas, her audiences growing with each performance. She became a master of making a large crowd feel like a small gathering, speaking to thousands as if they were friends in her living room. In 2009, during the MTV Video Music Awards, a moment unfolded that would enter pop culture history. As she accepted her award for Best Female Video, she was interrupted on stage. Though startled, she handled the moment with grace. Later invited back to finish her speech, it became an early lesson in public scrutiny and resilience. By the end of the Fearless era, Taylor had established herself not just as a country star, but as an artist capable of reaching across genres, connecting with listeners on a deeply human level. The year 2012 saw the release of Red, an album that marked a bold step into a broader musical landscape. While her earlier work leaned into country's roots, Red blended acoustic storytelling with pop anthems and even touches of rock and electronic music. It was an album of contrasts, of quiet introspection and soaring choruses, much like the color itself, symbolizing passion, heartbreak, and intensity. Songs such as All Too Well and Begin Again showed her lyrical depth, while tracks like We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together embraced playful pop energy. This was Taylor experimenting on a grand scale, bridging genres in a way that felt both natural and daring. The Red Tour became a spectacle of sound and visual storytelling, drawing fans from across the globe. But it was with her next release that she would make a definitive break from country and claim her place at the center of pop music's stage. In 2014, 1989 arrived, named after her birth year, and crafted as her first official pop album, with synth-driven melodies, polished production, and a distinctly 1980s-inspired aesthetic. It marked a complete reinvention. Shake It Off, Blank Space, and Style dominated charts, radio, and cultural conversation. The 1989 World Tour was a marvel, a dazzling blend of choreography, costume, and connection. It wasn't just a concert, it was a celebration of the new Taylor Swift, one unafraid to redefine herself. Fashion magazines began covering her style as closely as her music, and her influence reached far beyond the recording studio. By the close of the 1989 era, Taylor was no longer a country star crossing over. She was a global pop icon whose music, image, and narrative were carefully and artfully crafted. The close of the 1989 era brought challenges. intense media scrutiny, public feuds, and a shift in how the press portrayed her. In 2017, Taylor returned with Reputation, an album wrapped in darker tones, both musically and visually. The snake motif, the bold electronic beats, and the defiant lyrics made it clear this was an artist reclaiming her story. Songs like Look What You Made Me Do and Delicate balanced sharp edges with the moments of vulnerability. The Reputation Stadium Tour was her largest yet, a sweeping production that filled arenas with elaborate sets, massive screens, and an unshakable sense of theatricality. 2 years later, the release of Lover in 2019 shifted the palette again. Bright, pastel, and romantic. Tracks such as The Archer, Lover, and You Need to Calm Down reflected both personal intimacy and broader social commentary. It was an era of openness, warmth, and renewed connection with fans. These years also marked a growing conversation about the ownership of her music. The sale of her early master recordings prompted her decision to re-record her earlier albums, a move that would make waves in the industry and cement her reputation as a shrewd, empowered artist. The year 2020 was unlike any other, a world slowed by the pandemic, concert venues silent, and travel suspended. In this stillness, Taylor created Folklore, a surprise release steeped in acoustic textures, indie folk tones, and quiet storytelling. Written and recorded largely in isolation, the album felt like a whispered conversation in a candlelit room. Just months later, she unveiled Evermore, a sister record continuing the introspective, narrative style. These albums drew praise not only for their beauty, but for their ability to comfort listeners during uncertain times. In parallel, she began releasing Taylor's version re-recordings of her earlier work, beginning with Fearless and Red. Each release was both a celebration of her past and a reclamation of her creative legacy. Fans embraced the project with devotion, turning each release day into a communal event. Then came the Eras Tour, an ambitious live show celebrating every chapter of her career. With elaborate sets, costume changes, and a set list spanning decades, it became a cultural phenomenon. Cities hosting the tour saw economic boost, news coverage, and a flood of fans wearing friendship bracelets and album-themed outfits. By 2025, Taylor Swift was not only one of the most successful musicians in history, but a living archive of modern music, a storyteller whose songs had become part of the collective memory of a generation. Looking back from the quiet of the future, Taylor Swift's story reads like a carefully composed ballad, rising and falling, shifting in tone, yet always returning to the core of what made her unique: her words, her melodies, and her connection to those who listened. She had navigated the transformation of the music industry, from CDs to streaming, from physical tours to virtual performances, and back again. She had endured public scrutiny, embraced reinvention, and turned her personal narratives into universal anthems. In the decades ahead, her songs will likely be studied as both art and history, the chronicles of an era when music was as much about community as it was about sound. And perhaps somewhere, years from now, a young musician will pick up a guitar, play those first familiar chords, and feel the same spark that once ignited in a girl from Pennsylvania. And in that moment, Taylor Swift's melody will live on, not just as a sound, but as a part of history.